and Bhartrihari. His idea of the unity of signifiers signified in the sign is somewhat similar to the notion of sphota. More importantly, the very idea that formal rules can be applied to areas outside of logic or mathematics may itself have been catalyzed by Europe's contact with the work of Sanskrit grammarians. The Pali grammar of Kashayana, dated to the early centuries CE, describes the language of the Buddhist canon. Greece. The Greeks developed an alphabet based on a system previously used by the Phoenicians, adding signs for vowels and for extra consonants appropriate to their idiom. C. Robbins, 1997. As a result of the introduction of writing, poetry such as the Homeric poems became written and several editions were created and commented on, forming the basis of philology and criticism. Along with written speech, the Greeks commenced studying grammatical and philosophical issues. A philosophical discussion about the nature and origins of language can be found as early as the works of Plato. A subject of concern was whether language was man-made, a social artifact, or supernatural in origin. Plato in his Cratylus presents the naturalistic view that word meanings emerge from a natural process, independent of the language user. His arguments are partly based on examples of compounding, where the meaning of the whole is usually related to the constituents, although by the end he admits a small role for convention. The Sophists and Socrates introduced dialectics as a new text genre. The Platonic dialogues contain definitions of the meters of the poems and tragedy, the form and the structure of those texts. See the Republic and Phaedrus, Ion, etc. Aristotle supports the conventional origins of meaning. He defined the logic of speech and of the argument. Furthermore, Aristotle's works on rhetoric and poetics became of the utmost importance for the understanding of tragedy, poetry, public discussions, etc. as text genres. Aristotle's work on logic interrelates with his special interest in language, and his work on this area was fundamentally important for the development of the study of language. Logos in Greek means both language and logic, reasoning. In categories, Aristotle defines what is meant by synonymous or univocal words, what is meant by homonymous or equivocal words, and what is meant by paronymus or denominative words. He divides forms of speech as being either simple, without composition or structure, such as man, horse, fights, etc., or having composition and structure, such as a man fights, the horse runs, etc. Next, he distinguishes between a subject of predication, namely that of which anything is affirmed or denied, and a subject of inhesion. A thing is said to be inherent in a subject when, though it is not a part of the subject, it cannot possibly exist without the subject, e.g., shape in a thing having a shape. The categories are not abstract Platonic entities but are found in speech. These are substance, quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action and affection, and interpretatione. Aristotle analyzes categoric propositions and draws a series of basic conclusions on the routine issues of classifying and defining basic linguistic forms, such as simple terms and propositions, nouns and verbs, negation, the quantity of simple propositions, primitive roots of the quantifiers. In modern symbolic logic, investigations on the excluded middle, which to Aristotle isn't applicable to future tense propositions, the problem of future contingents, and on modal propositions. The Stoics made linguistics an important part of their system of the cosmos and the human. They played an important role in defining the linguistic sign terms adopted later on by Ferdinand de Saussure like significant and signifi. The Stoics studied phonetics, grammar, and etymology as separate levels of study. In phonetics and phonology, the articulators were defined. The syllable became an important structure for the understanding of speech organization. One of the most important contributions of the Stoics in language study was the gradual definition of the terminology and theory echoed in modern linguistics. Alexandrian grammarians also studied speech sounds and prosody. They defined parts of speech with notions such as noun, verb, etc. There was also a discussion about the role of analogy in language. In this discussion, the grammaticians in Alexandria supported the view that language, and especially morphology, is based on analogy or paradigm, whereas the grammatic in schools in Asia Minor considered that language is not based on analogical basis but rather on exceptions. Alexandrians, like their predecessors, were very interested in meter and its role in poetry. The metrical feat in the Greek was based on the length of time taken to pronounce each syllable, with syllables categorized according to their weight as either long syllables or short syllables, also known as heavy and light syllables, respectively, to distinguish them from long and short vowels. The foot is often compared to a musical measure in the long and short syllables to whole notes and half notes. The basic unit in Greek and Latin prosody is a mora, which is defined as a single short syllable. A long syllable is equivalent to 2 moras. A long syllable contains either a long vowel, a diphthong, or a short vowel followed by 2 or more consonants. Various rules of elision sometimes prevent a grammatical syllable from making a full syllable, and certain other lengthening and shortening rules, such as corruption, can create long or short syllables in contexts where one would expect the opposite. The most important classical meter as defined by the Alexandrian grammarians was the dactylic hexameter, the meter of Homeric poetry. This form uses verses of 6 feet. The first 4 feet are normally dactyls but can be spondees. The 5th foot is almost always a dactyl. The 6th foot is either a spondee or a trochee. The initial syllable of either foot is called the ictus, the basic beat of the verse. There is usually a caesura after the ictus of the 3rd foot. Subsequently, the Texticna Grammaticae, c. 100 BCE, G.K. Gramma meant letter, and this title means art of letters, possibly written by Dionysius Thrax 170-90 BCE, lists 8 parts of speech and lays out the broad details of Greek morphology, including the case structures. This text was intended as a pedagogic guide, as was Panini, and also covers punctuation and some aspects of prosody. Other grammars by Charisius, mainly a compilation of Thrax, as well as lost texts by Remius Palaemon and others, and Diomedes, focusing more on prosody, were popular in Rome as pedagogic material for teaching Greek to native Latin speakers. One of the most prominent scholars of Alexandria and the antiquity was Apollonius Discolus. Apollonius wrote more than 30 treatises on questions of syntax, semantics, morphology, prosody, orthography, dialectology, and more. Happily, 4 of these are preserved. We still have a syntax in 4 books, and 3 one-book monographs on pronouns, adverbs, and connectives, respectively. Lexicography became an important domain of study as many grammarians compiled dictionaries, thesauri, and lists of special words, lexees that were old, or dialectical or special, such as medical words or botanic words. At that period, in the early medieval times, we find more categories of dictionaries, like the Dictionary of Suedo, considered the first encyclopedic dictionary, etymological dictionaries, etc. At that period, the Greek language functioned as a lingua franca, a language spoken throughout the known world by the Greeks and Romans of that time, and, as a result, modern linguistics struggles to overcome this. With the Greeks, a tradition commenced in the study of language. The Romans and the medieval world followed, and their laborious work is considered today as a part of our everyday language. Think, for example, of notions such as the word, the syllable, the verb, the subject, etc. Romain, the 4th century, Aelius Donatus compiled the Latin grammar Ars Grammatica, that was to be the defining school text through the Middle Ages. A smaller version, Ars Minor, covered only the 8 parts of speech. Eventually, when books came to be printed in the 15th century, this was one of the first books to be printed. Schoolboys subjected to all this education gave us the current meaning of grammar, attested in English since 1176. China, similar to the Indian tradition, Chinese philology, Shaoshui elementary studies, began as an aid to understanding classics in the Han Dynasty, c. 3rd century BCE. Shaoshui came to be divided into 3 branches: Zhenggu, Xuangu exegesis, Wenzi script, and Yinyan sound sounds, and reached its golden age. In the 17th century CE, Qing dynasty, the glossary area, c. 3rd century BCE, comparable to the Indian Iantu, is regarded as the first linguistic work in China. Shuao and Jiezi, c. 2nd century BCE, the first Chinese dictionary, classifies Chinese characters by radicals, a practice that would be followed by most subsequent lexicographers. Two more pioneering works produced during the Han Dynasty are Fangyan, the first Chinese work concerning dialects, and Shiming, devoted to etymology. As in ancient Greece, early Chinese thinkers were concerned with the relationship between names and reality. Confucius, 6th century BCE, famously emphasized the moral commitment implicit in a name, Zhengming, stating that the moral collapse of the Pre-Qin was a result of the failure to rectify behavior to meet the moral commitment inherent in names. Good government consists in the ruler being a ruler, the minister being a minister, the father being a father, and the son being a son. If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. Analects 12.11, 13.3. However, what is the reality implied by a name? The later Mohists, or the group known as School of Names, Mingjia 479–221 BCE, consider that Ming name may refer to three kinds of she actuality, type, universals, horse, individual, John, and unrestricted, thing. They adopt a realist position on the name-reality connection. Universals arise because the world itself fixes the patterns of similarity and difference by which things should be divided into kinds. The philosophical tradition is well known for conundra resembling the Sophists, e.g. when Gongsun 4th century BCE questions if, in copula statements, x is y, are x and y identical, or is x a subclass of y. This is the famous paradox, a white horse is not a horse. Xuan, z. 3rd century BCE, revisits the principle of Zhengming, but instead of rectifying behavior to suit the names, his emphasis is on rectifying language to correctly reflect reality. This is consistent with a more conventional view of word origins. Yuding Sucheng Yuding Susheung. The study of phonology in China began late, and was influenced by the Indian tradition, after Buddhism had become popular in China. The rhyme dictionary is a type of dictionary arranged by tone and rhyme, in which the pronunciations of characters are indicated by Fanch spellings. Rhyme tables were later produced to aid the understanding of Fanch. Philological studies flourished during the Qing dynasty, with Duan Yukai and Wang Niansun as the towering figures. The last great philologist of the era was Zhang Binglan, who also helped lay the foundation of modern Chinese linguistics. The Western comparative method was brought into China by Bernard Karlgren, the first scholar